Huh. So, this happened. Huh. Not really sure what to do with this. What cool teams could I bring out with this? There's gotta be something I can do. There has to be a ton of teams out there that could use this. Huh. I got it. Let me ask you a question. Do you like Kaveh? Do you want to build some teams for him? Ever since I saw his release trailer and started seeing what his kit included, I was definitely interested, and started putting a lot of thought into what I could do with him. Truth be told, on paper, he's very straightforward. Put him with Bloom reactions and you're basically all set. In fact, this video could be considered a part 3 of sorts of a mini-series talking about Nilou and Kaveh Superbloom. In the previous video, we took Nilou out of the Superbloom team, and now it's Kaveh's turn to step slightly outside of his comfort zone. With all that being said, let's get into his strengths and weaknesses right away. So right off the hop, I can safely say that Kaveh is plenty strong, and it's for a lot of the same reasons why most Dendro characters are strong. But let's go into some details. Firstly, he has easy access to Dendro damage, both in the form of his skill, but also his burst, which gives him a fairly long-lasting Dendro infusion. This infusion has more advantages than just dealing Dendro damage, though. When these abilities touch Dendro cores, that is the Bloom cores, on their activation, as well as additional ones from his Constellation 6, they are instantly activated, dealing bonus damage, which is really strong. Which leads me to the next point, how he interacts with Dendro cores. Not only does he instantly activate them, he increases their damage, and even eliminates one of the major downsides of Bloom. That is, of course, taking damage from them. He heals from them instead. Also worth mentioning, those abilities of his, they actually hit pretty hard on their own. Even with an unoptimized build, they hit for some fairly big numbers, given that they are mostly meant to be hitting Dendro cores and not really the enemies. And finally, I can't stress this enough, he's a Dendro unit. Since Dendro's release, it has very quickly made its presence in the meta of this game very well known, and that's for a very good reason. Its reactions are extremely powerful. Even if Kaveh was the weakest character in the game, he'd probably still be pretty good just because he's a Dendro character. Alas, no character is perfect, and Kaveh does have some very noticeable weaknesses that need to be addressed no matter what team you think about running him in. He needs a battery. His energy regeneration is pretty bad on its own, so having a character that can help generate energy for him is a must. This is important since his burst is a massive part of what makes Kaveh strong in the first place. Next up is his attack ratios. His skill and burst activation hit fairly hard, but even with some hardy investment, his normal and charge attacks, even while infused, can feel like they're hitting like a wet noodle. Now, this isn't a deal breaker since the Dendro reactions can more than make up for low standalone damage, but we need to be aware of it. Because of this, Pyro Kaveh will probably be put in the shelf for now. That aside, this next point may be more of a personal thing, but I found his normal attack speed to be really slow. Once I got his Constellation 2, I felt like this problem mostly went away, but even though he works just fine out of the box, so to speak, it didn't really feel the best to play at first. Again, I have to emphasize that this one is my own personal opinion and personal bias. And finally, he has no synergies outside of Bloom. This can make building teams for him feel a little bit restrictive, but that didn't stop me from trying non-Bloom teams with him, so let's get right into that, shall we? Let's get the obvious team out of the way first. Bloom. Simply put, we took the Super out of Superbloom, and what we are left with is a pretty good team still, actually. For those who don't have Nilou, or don't particularly like her playstyle, and having the freedom to run different characters makes this a bit more interesting. More details on that later. Spread. A simple concept. Apply Electro, apply Dendro, burst with Kaveh, go to town. The bonus damage you get from spread makes Kaveh's normal attacks feel pretty devastating with each swing, and in my case, having Raiden Shogun makes his energy issues a thing of the past. Burning. Time to get cooking. With this team, you set your enemies on fire and keep them on fire. Burning may be the weakest form of Dendro reaction, but having a small amount of extra damage over time isn't that bad of a deal. And finally, Hyperbloom, or Burgeon. I've taken to grouping these two together since there's basically no difference between the two of them, either Cookie Hyperblooms or Toma Burgeons. You've probably noticed at this point that there's a lot of repeating faces amongst these teams. That's because there isn't really a lot of variety here. That being said, there are a lot of options on building these individual teams, for sure. But the teams themselves aren't super varied. Let me explain. I'll go into detail into each team on their own, but for now, I just gotta say that Kaveh is a bit tricky to work with, and he is a bit limited on who he can play with. So let's talk about the Bloom team. Though not quite as powerful as Nilou's Superbloom, the regular Bloom reaction is still actually pretty good, and Kaveh's bonus damage really helps things out. My version of these teams uses my newly acquired Baizhu, Shinsho for easy Hydro application and damage of course, Kazuha to group up enemies as well as the Dendro cores themselves, and finally Kaveh to bring it all home. I found this team to have a really nice play pattern and work really well. It turns out that being able to bring all the Bloom cores and enemies together is a really good thing. For replacements, Baizhu could be any other Dendro character, but for safety's sake I'd probably recommend Yao Yao. Shinshoga is replaced by Yelan or Kokomi, the usual suspects, and finally Sucrose is an easier replacement for Kazuha. And Jean can also fill this role, but you play it a little differently, mainly catapulting the Blooms into your enemies, but that's neither here nor there. Next up is the Spread team. Truth be told, this team outperformed my expectations. It was pretty good actually. Even when you're not taking advantage of Kaveh's powerful Bloom buffs, his Dendro Infusion can get the job done on its own almost. Building this team is really easy. Any two Electro characters and any other Dendro character, and this team is more or less good to go. All you really need to make sure is that you have at least one of them that can heal and you're all set. Cookie Shinobu, Yao Yao, Baizhu all fit that role really well. In my version of the team, I have Raiden Shogun, which makes a pretty big difference since it means that Kaveh's burst is usually always ready to go. And the times where it isn't, I have Raiden Burst to fall back on. Other Electro characters can be pretty solid batteries as well, such as Fischl, though there are still other free-to-play friendly options that can help fix Kaveh's energy issues. Now normally, I leave the meme team until the end of the list, but honestly I found this team to be a lot of fun, and it felt like there might be some realistic hope for this team. Like I said earlier, Burning is the weakest Dendro reaction, and one of the weakest reactions in the entire game, probably only ousted by Crystallize. However, its damage output when combined with a good chunk of Elemental Mastery, as well as a few bonuses, such as the one that Baizhu gives to Dendro reactions, you can get some pretty fast-ticking damage. The thing with Burning is that once it's on an enemy, it's really easy to keep them burning, since the burning itself counts as pyro being applied to the target. So toast up a few marshmallows and let your enemies burn with this team. Not a ton of replacements here honestly, since I think that Baiju's healing bonus and burning bonus is somewhat needed to make it feel good, as well as teams like this needing all the powerful characters it can get its hands on. So if you have the really powerful characters like Zhongling and Kazuha, why not use them, right? Anyway, as far as playing the team goes, pretty straightforward. You apply your pyro, you apply your Dendro, you swirl your pyro, and you keep your enemies nice and toasted. Pretty fun actually. Pretty fun, and the damage was respectable. Finally, it's time to be the fun police and talk about Hyperbloom. So I've spoken about Hyperbloom on this channel probably even more than trying to make non-pyro characters into pyro characters, and that's saying something. Look, I'm not going to waste your time here. Hyperbloom is good. Hydro meets Dendro to make blooms, Electro meets Blooms for Hyper Bloom, watch your enemies dissolve. That being said, this version of it does have some nuance in the fact that during your cookie's brief downtimes, Kaveh can just blow up the blooms himself to get the job done. So there you have it, a whole bunch of Kaveh teams, some playing to his natural strengths, and some completely ignoring them. I think he's a fairly straightforward character, but I had some fun with him. If you have Kaveh, I think he's actually worth your time. Anyway, here's a brief showcase of what he can do. See you on the other side. So, that's that. Honestly, Kaveh isn't the most exciting character in the game, but he's pretty good, feels good to play, and has quite a few endearing qualities just as a character. I hope you enjoyed what I put together here. I was trying a different idea here, mainly talking about a meta team and then taking some of the characters out of the meta team and seeing what they could do on their own. If you like what I'm doing and you think I earned it, please leave a like, subscribe, and maybe leave a comment about how you feel about Kaveh, or what teams you use him in. Anyway, that's all from me, and as always, cheers.